You don't have to be in the army. You don't have to fight. You don't even have to be a martial artist. You could be a banker, a stockbroker, a housekeeper. You could be anything. But thinking like a warrior is building mental strength and building overall fortitude, but also organizing your thinking and the systems of your life appropriately. Like I recently did a small research project, not just comparing testosterone levels in the average American man from 1980 to each decade from then. And it's like in 1980, it was a little over 600, and today it's right about 400. So that's a 50% decrease in the last few decades.
What advice would you give to who don't necessarily have a huge amount of access to the outdoors or the outbacks or the mountain the way you do?
Today's guest is James Pieratt, an ultramarathon runner who completed an incredible 800-mile journey and has dedicated years to studying the mindset and training methods of history's greatest warriors. James combines insights from ancient Spartans, Romans, and samurai with modern performance science to help people reclaim their warrior archetype. He's here to explain how we can learn from history's fiercest warriors to build unshakable mental fortitude and physical resilience.
James, I'm so happy to have you on the show. How are you today?
Oh, I'm doing great. Thanks for having me, Giselle.
I just found out that you are located right next to where the Twilight series was shot, and I am a little bit obsessed. That's an understatement. So tell me more.
Yeah, this is true. We're on the Washington coast. That would be the far northern Pacific coast of America. And so Twilight was filmed primarily in and around and set in the small town of Forks, which is it's really, it's just it's a small town, nothing too crazy like economically or socially, but it's just kind of in the middle of a rainforest, like a North American rainforest. So it's if you like mists and ferns and giant trees, it is, it's very much a nice place to be. And we started out in California. I was originally, so just a very, very short background. My dad was an Appalachian bear hunter. My mom comes from one of Japan's oldest families. So I had kind of two very, different parents and, obviously very different sets of grandparents. But I grew up outside of Sacramento, California, which is it's the capital of California, but it's primarily a city surrounded by agricultural area. So this particular region of California provides I think it's the most productive agricultural region in the world. So a lot of farm work. I grew up in, lots of wheelbarrows and shovels and animals and, country boy, as we would say out here. And then I had kind of a turbulent childhood and got into drugs and crime in my teenage years. And so most of from my late teens to 31, my life was not ideal or productive in terms of, well, really in any terms. So prison, heroin addiction, pretty much, everything that goes along with all that. I'll spare the details. But and then at around 31, I woke up one day and I just had a weird epiphany that I just hated my life. I hated I hated being unhealthy and drug addicted on parole, at a methadone clinic and just unable to get a job. I hated it. And I just had this weird epiphany that it's like, well, your life is just a direct result of the decisions you've made. And if you start making better decisions, the outcomes are going to be better. Now, this seems like an exceedingly simple, realization to have, but I had kind of come up in, the belief that life happened to you and, you endured it with stoicism and kept moving, but you didn't really have much control over it. It's kind of like that old farmer's mentality from the area I grew up in. And some of the toughest people you'll ever meet in your life in terms of actual enduring suffering and mental hardship and physical pain, but they don't. A lot of times they're not of the mindset that you can actually change this. It's kind of almost not even a disrespectful, but a peasant's mindset. You show up, your honor is the labor, and that's that was just kind of how your existence is. For me, realizing oh my God, I truly do have control over what happens from here on out was extremely empowering for me. And so I went really hard into learning meditation at first. Sam Harris's mindfulness meditation was extremely useful to me, not even for any sort of enlightenment, but just learning how what are your thoughts, what are your impulses, what you can listen to, what you can ignore, and learning, really what's your ego and what's your own true mind speaking to you. And so that was extremely useful for me. And that eventually led to doing some jujitsu, doing some ultra marathon running when COVID happened. And then the ultra marathon running is really kind of where I started to break through to some different levels in my journey of evolution. And that is just I realized pretty quick that I didn't have any running background or anything like that, but my dad was a bear hunter, so I grew up in the mountains, and I realized that that had kind of left me with a mental fortitude that was very useful for enduring, long stretches and hundreds of miles on the trail. So it was a pretty quick transition for me for that, and I found some success in it surprisingly quickly, especially for someone that didn't have a background. And so it kind of this positive feedback loop just encouraged me to kind of go deeper and explore more and run longer and run harder places and, to run across the hottest desert on earth and, start doing some of these things. And that really just kind of took on a life of its own. Over time, I built a business that, started specializing in training military personnel and to kind of do some of these things how to, essentially just that they would call tactical conditioning. So conditioning for the battlefield as opposed to like the gym. And throughout this all, I've always harbored a massive interest in like history's warriors, like, pretty much anything before the invention of gunpowder. You got Apaches, you got, the Romans versus the Gauls, you have, you know what I mean? You have English longbowmen, you got Hadza tribesmen in Africa. I mean, samurai, you name it. And given the fact that I come from one of the oldest samurai families on earth, I mean, maybe that's not so much of a mystery where that interest comes from, but I've always just been fascinated. And so a lot of the social media content that I put out is based off not just the physical training, but the mental training of past warriors and people. And like today, I think my post today was just a list of quotes from Miyamoto Musashi, who was one of the greatest philosophers who ever lived, and most likely the greatest swordsman who ever lived. But essentially, he was just like a wandering swordsman in Japan who went around, went about 60-0 in duels with other expert swordsmen, and then just kind of retired to a cave to explore philosophy and write his memoirs. And so he is like, just for example, a very simple quote from him that I like is like, I know it's difficult, but it's always difficult at first. It's like this hyper simple quote, but when you think about it, it's like, oh my, you start just unpacking that and you're like, oh my God. And he was a big believer in the idea that it's good to be able to say something good, but it's great to be able to say something good in a few words. And so very simple, very plainly spoken, and very precise in his communications and thoughts. And so I've always liked that myself. But I found that these, by studying ancient warriors and military leaders, it provides just an excellent blueprint to living everyday life, no matter who you are. And so a lot of times I want to clarify for people when I talk about like training or thinking like a warrior, you don't have to be in the army, you don't have to fight, you don't even have to be a martial artist. You could be a banker, a stockbroker, a housekeeper, you could be anything. But thinking like a warrior is building mental resistance. I'm sorry, building mental strength and building overall fortitude, but also organizing your thinking and the systems of your life appropriately. Like Julius Caesar and Napoleon didn't find success in the military because they were disorganized in their life and undisciplined in their daily habits. So I think it's kind of important to realize that much like you say, The Art of War by Sun Tzu is, one of the most popular books there is in, all of the, on the corporate world to this day. And I mean, like, you don't have to be a military general or a strategian to like find value in the art of war per se. So I try to really, just to sum it up, put a bow on it. I think data is probably the most useful resource we have because it tells us everything that we know about how to interact with whatever fields we're trying to operate and thrive in. But the biggest body of data on Earth isn't the latest scientific study, it's history. I mean, all of history. It's literally the biggest body of data we have available to us. And there's a strong bias, like when I jokingly say, like, history beats science, there's an inherent bias in that because the second that science is worth its salt, a scientific study proves anything, it becomes history. So it's like, Louis Pasteur was a scientist, but the second that he cured rabies, that became history. So it's like, there's a little bit of a joke baked into it, but there's seriousness when you think about like if you want to talk about data, if you want to talk about like a Socratic method and really refining your approach to securing an outcome, data is how you do it. And the biggest body of data we have is history.
James, I really wanted to get your views on what has gone wrong because you are an absolute world leading expert when it comes to the study of ancient warriors. I know you've done such a deep dive on the Romans, the Aztecs, the samurais, the Spartans. Now let's take a moment, let's take a step back, let's look at those warriors and now let's compare and contrast to the modern men, right? So we're thinking the traders, the bankers, the lawyers, the
Oh yeah.
white collar, super performant, brilliant professionals that I work with day in and day out that are super anxious, exhausted, stressed out, tired, aches and pains everywhere, tight neck, tight shoulder, stubborn 5 pounds that they can't shake off, testosterone all over the shop. Can you just tell us how, from an evolutionary standpoint, we've gone from those warriors to now the modern man who is also a kind of modern warrior in his own right, successful, praised, promoted, making loads of money, but really struggling physically. Tell us, what's your take on that?
So it's important to like think about this in terms, like I'm big on framing things because you can have the same experience and put two different frames on it and it can be good or bad. Same thing with any piece of data, really, in interpretation. So a lot of people, and like I know, like I generally work somewhere around 70 hours a week. Like, it's a little recently dropped down a little less, but it's like I run a company, I run a company that had with international hours nonetheless. And on top of that, I train 25 to 30 hours a week as an endurance athlete. So it's like I totally get, when time is crunched. There's a couple things that I think that are really important for people that kind of find themselves in this. I'm too busy and stressed. I don't feel good. I don't like how I feel. I don't like how I look, but I'm too busy and stressed to do anything about it. You have to understand that like exercise, you can view it, you can utilize it as it can be a chore, it can be an errand, or it can be an outlet, like something truly meditative that you actually go into looking forward to at the end of the day and leave feeling better. Like one example, a lot right now, Brazilian Jiu Jitsu is very popular. I'm a big fan of jiu-jitsu, competed in it for years. But the one reason that people like that a lot more than, and this is just for instance, there's many examples, but there's one reason that people like that more than just going to a gym and doing sets and reps is because they get to go use their mind. Like Brazilian jiu-jitsu is mathematically speaking about 12 times more complicated than chess, just in terms of like possible permutations of responses and strategies and whatnot. And so that's very stimulating for the mind, especially for CEOs and high achiever types because it's like you get to actually use your mind, you get to use strategy, you get to learn, you get to be more dangerous and more capable. And then like you're almost accidentally getting in shape at that point because, it's like, you're actually enjoying the thing you're doing. Like I'm not a very good basketball player. I will occasionally play like with, my brother or friends or something like that. But it's like I like doing that because at the end of the day, when I look up, I have 12,000 steps, and I didn't ever, and I didn't even realize that I had exercised at any one point. It's as opposed to just going for a run. So I think it's important to look at it like that and maybe kind of even redefine your idea of what exercise is. Like it doesn't have to be in an air conditioned gym, just lifting dumbbells or machines in some mind numbingly boring way. It can be trail running, it can be jujitsu, it can be biking, you can go for a swim, like there's lots of different ways to do this. So really like it's kind of counterintuitive. But my advice to people is like, what do you want to do? Like what sounds fun? Like of all the things out there, what sounds fun? And lean into that. And like that goes a long way. The other thing is like if you can bring yourself in terms of time and discipline to do twice a week, 15 minutes of like stretching and stuff with a band, that really will go a long way to helping your joints, especially if you spend a lot of time sitting and whatnot. Some very light stretching, mobility. Yoga is a good one too, because you can put on a 10-minute yoga video on your lunch break and do it, and then you'll just feel better for the rest of the day. But I think it's important not to put too much pressure, structure, or preaching behind a lot of the exercise stuff because it just turns a lot of people off. So it really is like find a way, find something you want to do that just so happens to be physical and outside. And then yeah, if you want to go beyond that, I think that's great too. And then in terms of like time, some people I don't have the time. This that you definitely have the time. Everyone has the time. Like I can destroy your lower body in 3 minutes with a workout. Like if you don't have time, and you're telling me you don't have time to go like do a leg day, just do 2 sets of 60 seconds of split squat jumps, just alternating back and forth, and tell me you're not walking on jello after 3 minutes. So there are ways to kind of do this, but if you're a high achiever, if you're a successful businessman, a decision maker, you are, whether you like it or not, a tribal chieftain. Like in the anthropological term, you're a tribal chieftain. People look to you, not just your family, but your employees, the people around you, they look to you. They're going to look at your habits, your discipline, your bearing, your physicality, all of these things, whether you like it or not. And I don't care if you live, I mean, if you're in the medical insurance field and you know like physicality has nothing to do with it, out there's no alpha culture, there's people are still going to look to you like you know you still have to be responsible for the people that you're leading, just like a tribal chieftain would. And you can't have them go hungry, you can't leave a bad example for them, you can't pass on generational trauma or toxic habits to the best of your ability. So it's important to really kind of reframe things and remember that like you might think of yourself as just like an average guy sitting in an office somewhere, you know, with a few employees, but like in the entire arc of the human story, you are a tribal chieftain, and those people are depending on you and looking to you. And so that does come with a little bit of responsibility. Just don't let that responsibility turn you off, you know.
I love that. Thanks, James. And I love the way you frame things. What do you think are some of the biggest lessons that we can take away from looking at history? I love the way you say that history can teach us so much looking back. What do you think we can learn from the Romans, the Spartans, just to give a couple of examples, and the importance of the physicality and the fact that back then I'm pretty sure not many folks were metabolically obese as we're now struggling with. So what is it that, they got right that we got so wrong along the way?
So it's interesting to look at this. There's a couple layers to this. For starters, ancient Rome was a culture of gluttons. You know, like even there, so they're upper class people, like everyone's seen the movies, the banquets, like gluttony. They had it was common practice for each diner to have a metal bin next to their seat where they could vomit, and just to make room for more food. Like it was completely like, and I don't mean like bulimic, like oh I ate and I ate, filled up, I want to eat more, so I'm going to vomit and eat all over again, just over and over. So the Romans, they were gluttons, yet their obesity rate was only about 2%. Whereas modern America, my country per se, it's, you know, somewhere like, I think we're getting near 40%, you know what I mean? And so it's interesting to be like, well, you essentially have the Roman Empire and like, let's call America what it is. You get more or less the modern equivalent of the Roman Empire. And why is it that one of them had a 2% obesity rate and the other one had a 40% obesity rate? Well, first of all, it's just Rome. They had a greater general emphasis on health, and so it's essentially like no matter who you, even if you were a rich, you know, a 60-year-old senator who had everything you wanted, you were still walking around the forum, you're still walking around the Senate. Like, you know, I recently did, like, we tried to calculate based off city layout, lifestyles, different, you know, like contemporary sources. And we generally found that even the average Roman was generally like about 12,000 steps a day. If you're walking 12,000 steps a day and you also have a culture based around hanging out at the gym, and not just the gym like in the weight way, but like they would go to the palestra and maybe do like hit a punching bag a little bit, and then they would go, you know, they might you know, essentially swing some light dumbbells and stuff, but then mostly they would just go sit in the baths like it was a social thing for the men. But even going to the gym to primarily sit in the bath, you're still conscious of your health, you're still doing some light workouts, you're still, you know, they're really paying a lot more attention to these things. And one equivalent that I draw is like people will talk about. I recently had a conversation with one of the world's leading martial arts experts on the level of martial arts skill in ancient Greece versus today. And like some people would assume because it was a long time ago, it would be less developed. But him and I actually agreed in the sense that they, other than the fact that the ancient Greek culture was a lot longer than ours, there was much more, you know, longer continuity of tradition and information. It also prized health and martial ability far greater than our modern societies do for the most part. So a greater emphasis of government resources, of attention, you know, a greater crop of athletes, you know, was all getting drawn directly into this for 500 years. And so you know, it's like you get pretty good at something like that. But I'm bringing this up because cultural emphasis. We emphasize, you know, many of the wrong things: social media followers, money, house size, whatever. And it's not that there's anything wrong with feeling like, you know, an affinity towards those things in itself. But if that trumps your health, the way that you're treating the people around you, including yourself, physically, mentally, emotionally, then that, I mean, I'm not even going to like frame it from a judgmental standpoint. That's just there's going to be side effects of that, we'll say, in the long term.
So, what could be, in your opinion, James, having studied ancient warriors the way you have, some of the red flags or warning signs for the modern man listening to you right now, that they may be stepping further and further away from their warrior archetype, and they may be doing some damage to themselves, to their teams, to their health, to their bodies? Like, what would you say to them so that they can listen today and think, okay, those are red flags, those are trigger points, and maybe, early warning signs that I'm drifting away from my warrior? If you're enjoying this show so far, I just have a very quick favor to ask you. Could you go ahead and click the follow button or the subscribe button? It would mean so much to me, and it would really help to grow our show. When you click subscribe or when you click follow, it really helps us grow the show so that we can enhance the production, we can bring you the best possible guests, and we can have the most amazing conversations. So if you haven't already done this, please take a moment today to go ahead and click the follow button or the subscribe button. It means so much. Thank you so much. And now let's go back to this amazing conversation.
Yeah, so I mean, that's the interesting thing about the body is it's going to show you what's what first. It's when that paunch at the bottom of your stomach, when you start noticing that maybe you're balding a little faster than you were a year or two ago, even though you're only a year or two older. You're starting to see some things internally in terms of the way you think about things, depression. You're starting to take on a mindset of defeat. Oh, well, it's like, yeah, I'm 45. Of course, I'm going to start getting a belly and losing my hair and all these things. It's like, no, that's traditionally not how that went. For most of human history, you remained fit until you died in your 60s, assuming you lived past, the infant mortality stage before modern medicine. But it's like that. It is this degradation is not natural. In fact, I recently did a small research project, and I posted the results online a while ago, but just comparing testosterone levels in the average American man from 1980 to each decade from then. And it's like in 1980, it was a little over 600, and today it's right about 400. So that's a 50% decrease in the last few decades, and that is statistically notable. And it's like, what on earth are we doing that our grandfather, like it's getting to the point now where it's not uncommon for someone in, a 30-year-old today to have the same testosterone levels as his grandfather. So there's guys in their 70s walking around with, testosterone that's, 600, and you're seeing that or lower in some of these, kids that are in their 20s now, which is just insane. And yeah, you can talk about microplastics and some of the environmental stuff for sure, but mostly we're not outside, we're not moving, we're not doing manual labor, we're not doing truly intensive exercise. It's like you might go get on the treadmill for 30 minutes at the gym and then go home and convince yourself that you exercise. And again, that's fine. It's a great place to start, and that's a good way to keep your heart healthy and stuff, but it's not going to boost your testosterone in the same way that being outside and doing difficult things as a lifestyle will. And again, for most people, like if you work inside, it's not very feasible to go spend 8 hours outside working like a peasant, and that's fine. But do some small, hard things for sure. But as we talked about earlier, just scale the dosage, like, again, and find a medium that's fun. Like sometimes I don't feel like going to the gym and lifting weights, so I just go out back and I find a bunch of rocks to stack in a pile, and then I unstack them. That takes me 30 minutes. I'm in the sunlight. My dog's playing around with me. I mean, my wife's in the kitchen, and it's like that's not by any means a chore or inconvenient. And that is primal. And these things do, like, for those who are interested in objective physical performance, like these things transfer to the real world. Like, I can deadlift more than a quarter ton. I just ran 800 miles, like, and it wasn't I didn't hate any minute of that training. I just built a system around doing things organically and holistically according to my own personal and psychological traits. And it's the same thing. Like you don't walk into the boardroom in a suit you bought off the rack, you know what I mean, at Target. It's like, no, things should be tailored to you, and not just the color and the cut and the buttons, but the cuffs, everything. Like, and building your daily routine, including the physical side of it's no different than that, truly.
I love that you said that. What advice would you give to listeners who don't necessarily have a huge amount of access to the outdoors or the outbacks or the mountain the way you do? Let's think about listeners in New York City or London or Paris. How can they get that dosage of the outdoor, of the primal? How can they stack their stones if they don't
Yeah,
have
no,
the
totally.
stones available?
No, totally. Well, so that, like, things like that, let's look at like microdoses. Like, you might be working crazy hours in a high rise or in an office. So when can you get out to the balcony and get 10 minutes of sunlight on your face? When can you take the stairs instead of the elevator? When do you have 7 minutes in between briefings so you can go for just a walk and get an extra couple hundred steps in? Like, these are the pennies that add up. So it's like, assuming you're a high achiever, you most likely have some idea of, fiscal responsibility. Well, it's the same thing. It's why you don't leak resources unnecessarily. And essentially, if you're just sitting around and you have 10 minutes and you're just going to scroll on your phone, then that's what you're doing. You're leaking resources, because your time and your energy are your most valuable resources, period. More than your money, more than anything, anything non-sentimental. Those are your most valuable resources by far. So it's like, you think about those and think about it in that term, or in terms like that. Don't waste those resources. And it again, small things. You can take the stairs instead, go for a walk, get a kettlebell in your office, because you can do 10 burpees or 10 kettlebell swings and not work up a sweat. I know. I'll do them in a suit all the time, and then go do something at a hotel directly after, if I have to go speak or have to do something like that. Like, I know exactly, like, I can do 14 burpees without getting any sweat on me. I know that. Like, maybe 5, 10. So like, if you do this throughout the day, that will add up. Again, even if you're not trying to be a super fit guy or anything, don't you just want a little bit more toned stomach, a little bit healthier heart, and a little bit longer life, And that, like, getting that level of progress is a very, very small amount of, it's consistency, small doses of consistency. Like, you're not trying to deadlift 1,000 pounds or do anything that's like, massive, which means the thresholds on success are quite a bit smaller. You just have to be consistent in your application of these habits.
Love it. Thanks, James. Now, I have a question, because you mentioned your wife, and at least in
Mhm.
my understanding of the world, being a wife myself and being the wife of a very, very fit man, I'm pleased to say he's
Well,
RAF
congratulations
officer.
for that. Good for you.
I know, I'm very proud indeed. He's fit and healthy. And I have to say that for me, it is fundamentally important, because I find it inspirational. And he's, my archetype of what my vision of a healthy male in all the
Masculinity.
sense. Absolutely. The reason I mentioned that is because, as the wife of a modern warrior, I believe that I also have a role to play vis-a-vis his being the fittest that he can be, mentally, physically, spiritually, and psychologically. So I want to ask you, for the women listening to us right now, so that this is not just an episode for our male
Right.
listeners, what can wives, what can girlfriends do to foster an environment within the family and the home life where we can actually make our husbands become the fittest warriors on earth?
That's a really good question. I like it a lot. So it's actually very relevant, because my wife and I are very aligned in our goals and pursuits, and she was fortunately able to retire, young, and so most of her professional outputs and time beyond the stuff that around the house goes to helping me out or supporting me, and I'm eternally grateful for that. Always will be. But having said that, I think it's important to think, like, it's natural in a conversation of masculinity to relegate women to, like, the back seat, much in the way, to be fair, much in the way that one might when women are talking about, like, abortion rights or something. It's probably, maybe, like, it's natural to think like, oh, man doesn't have a place in this conversation. And in that example, maybe. But I think with the cop, when it comes to masculinity, women have a greater part in it than most people realize. And specifically, just to start with a very historical example, women were considered at least an equal in ancient Sparta when it came to creating warriors, which is why female fitness in ancient Sparta was as important and emphasized as male fitness. Essentially, the idea that fit mothers have fit babies, and it's not just physically, but, like, mentally, they even believed, like, in terms of character. And it's funny, because you kind of write that off, and then it's like, the more we learn about epigenetics and some of these other things today, you're like, I don't know, they might have been onto something before we were. Kind of like how the Mayans knew how to chart the stars until, better than we did until 1980 something or whatever, until we got actual satellites up there. But in terms of today, how it applies, I think I'm a big believer that excellence is achieved through the process and not the pursuit of an outcome. And it sounds like I'm splitting hairs here, but essentially, like, if you just focus on the gold medal, you do everything in your power to get that gold medal. Like, that gets you a long way, and a lot of people get by on that. And there's a lot of ways to become very good, to become great, but legendary people don't do that. Like, if you look at the Michael Jordans, the Kobe Bryants, the Rockefellers, none of them do that. They're not seeking a simple outcome. Like that's almost like a juvenile interpretation of success for minds like that. For them, what they do is they develop a culture of excellence. And that is like they create the most fertile ground they possibly can to grow excellence. And the most successful sports team of all time is the New Zealand All Blacks, the rugby team, the national rugby team of New Zealand. And that is interesting because they don't train, perform, or think like athletes. Their entire culture is built around the Maori warrior. And traditional. That's why they do their haka before their every rugby game, and they it's like they train with like a primal intensity. Also, they give a lot more back to their community. Like they look at themselves as like the stewards of their community, the protectors of their community, and that creates. I mean, like it just. For instance, they were actually playing France in their last rugby game I was watching. They were winning the game by quite a bit, and there was like 5 or 10 seconds left on the clock. And they were winning by 30 points. And like in an American football game, the thing would just be like take a knee, let the clock run out, whatever. These guys, they're no, there's zero chance they could ever lose. And there's 7 seconds left, and they're still trying to score. Like they're going head to head clash. Like it's war down to the very, very last second of a game they had already dominated. And I was like watching this and I was like, this is amazing. But like thinking about psychologically powerful, there's other teams watching this, right? And then they got to play France again. They got to play all these other teams again in the future. Oh my God, like these guys. So that's a warrior spirit. That's not, I love American football, but you don't see that American football. Like if there's a 30, if they're up by 30, you put all your worst players in, you run the clock out and that's that. And these guys had their A-line end down to the last second. These guys were going balls to the wall. And it was, the difference between warriors and athletes. But bringing this back, that is a result of their culture. Okay, they're not here just asking themselves what can we do to get a gold medal. It is what can we do to foster an environment that creates the best possible athletes around. And they also have a belief that better humans make better All Blacks. So they do a lot of stuff on developing mental stuff and not just like focus and the typical repetition and affirmation that a lot of us high achievers use, but like developing the emotional side of things as well. And what's interesting is I saw this in ultramarathon running. It's like many athletes and humans don't look to develop the emotional side of themselves, but they're confused by why they break emotionally when hard things happen. And it's like, well, yeah, like pressure, it's mental. And then there's, physical aspect of performance. But if you can't emotionally, like if you don't have emotional bulwarks to hold up your mental processes, don't be surprised when they fail. If you're an incomplete human who's just really mentally strong, physically strong, you're going to run into a lot of issues. And I won't use any names, but like there are some very high level athletes and influencers and, mindset people that have very, very little emotional development in terms of their priorities. And you see it. And it's like, okay, you can do some cool stuff. You can do some hard things, but the words that come from your mouth carry very little value. They're generic, it's like stuff off a bumper sticker. And on top of that, like I see you yelling at your wife or I see you yelling at your support team during an ultramarathon, you're like, whatever it is. And it's like, that's not what we're here for. Like that. I mean, for me personally, that's not my idea of strength and leadership. I will add one thing to that, like somewhat unrelated, but I think it's important also to rein in your anger because anger is weakness. No matter how you frame it, no matter how righteous it is, anger is weakness because you're losing control of your barriers and your processes and it's distracting, which is possibly the most dangerous thing for any of us is distraction.
I really want to go deeper into that anger. Knowing what you know, what have you noticed around how samurais or Aztecs have handled anger? Because it's a very human emotions. It's particularly prevalent when you have a bit of a type A, a bit of an obsessive, very leadership-like mindset. So it would make sense that one who is most ambitious and most goal orientated would be most prone to anger outbursts because it's almost the flip side of the brilliance, right? It's like the price you pay sometimes. What
It
would you
is.
say to that in terms of what have you learned from history in terms of the safest, most holistic way of managing anger? But what also happens when others, your tribe members, your warriors, perceive you being angry? What happens to the perception of the rest of the team?
That's a very good question. Definitely, you lose respect in the eyes of your team because if you can't control yourself, you can't control the events around you, and if you can't control the events around you, they can't depend on you subconsciously or consciously. You can't, even if you are angry, you can't let them see that. Ironically, the answer to anger is very, very simple. I'm not going to say it's easy, but it is very simple. And do you know what the source of all human anger is?
Fear?
That's very, very close. And that can translate quickly, but no. At its base, at least in terms of human interactions, all anger comes from being treated in a way we don't believe we should be treated. Essentially, being treated as less than what we believe our status is in like a primate sense of the word. When you think about it, someone cuts you off in traffic, you like some small inconvenience. Like if you were to think about it in the objective sense of the word, there's zero negative impact on you. Being at work 3.4 seconds late because someone cut you off in traffic has no impact on your life, no nothing. But you don't think they should have done that. You think you deserve better than that, and they did it anyway, so you're angry. And you're most of the time you're not conscious of it. Like this isn't me. I'm not blaming anyone. I didn't even realize this was happening until like a couple years ago. Like in your brain. But when these things happen, if you just remind yourself, like, oh, this isn't like. First of all, this isn't a big deal. This is me, like the chimp in the back of my brain making noise because he thinks that he's king chimp and should be, saluted by every person that passes or whatever the thing is. It all comes back to that. So it's important to remember that when it's happening and not be absorbed by the process unknowingly. But additionally, the answer to this is humbleness. The biggest thing that I learned from my 800-mile run, and actually you're the first person I've talked about this with, the biggest thing I took away from it wasn't strength, it was humbleness. Like I realized that no matter what you do, no matter what you think you are, at the end of the day, we all just want some cool sheets and a hot meal, a nice shower. As I was out there just day after day after day doing these things, like I couldn't help but think about, there's a certain amount of attention that comes with doing like a large physical feat. But as I was out there, I'm like, this isn't that different from the Japanese worker in Tokyo working 18 hours a day, or the utilities worker working a 4-day shift in Texas because there's power outages that took out a whole power grid. This comes with no additional internally, like in the way that I think about it, comes with no additional props, respect, or entitlement. You know what I mean? Like there's a physical element to this, but so what? Like everything's physical. And like I told myself, like there were 12-year-old girls in the Holocaust who walked hundreds of miles barefoot, just to survive. So it's like it'd be a little silly if I started looking at myself running at a 200-mile race and started patting myself on the back, And it's not that you shouldn't be proud of that. Like you definitely own it. Like enjoy the view, enjoy your accomplishment. Just don't start thinking that you're entitled to anything more than the next guy because you did something cool once. And if you can kind of program yourself to remember that and think about that, when that guy cuts you off in traffic, you're going to be like, oh, I'm a human being and someone else did a human thing and it had an effect on me. Cool, let's go on with my day. That asshole, and start honking and fight, whatever, however people react. I think it's important to remember that anger is coming from a usually very unjustified place, a sense of entitlement. And if you can just kind of work on the humbleness side of thing, it helps a lot. And to be clear, when I say humble, I'm not talking about false humbleness, like social media posts or like weird self-deprecation. I just mean realizing that, hey, like I'm a man, I'm here doing a thing on earth for a very, very short amount of time with a bunch of other people. And in some way we're all connected. Like maybe I don't deserve the world. And maybe non-politically correct truth is like, you do more, you probably are entitled to more, but just don't think that makes you better than the next guy, or that you're entitled to more than, more bricks than the ones you physically stacked with your own hands, so to speak.
Speaking of bricks, do you think that perhaps one of the reasons why men are now struggling with a bit of an anger epidemic could be that they're spending so much time away from natural environment and away from the outdoor and away from elements that actually make them release some of that anger and get closer to nature? And the reason I want to ask you about that is just drawing from a personal perspective and experience. I actually went a Lapland hunting experience with my whole family.
Nice, yeah. Finland, nice.
I'm obsessed with bone broth and the hunting culture. I would not call
Awesome.
myself a hunter per se, but I'm
No,
very admirative of hunting and I love it very much. And I think it's so primal and so fundamental to actually harness that warrior archetype from a psychological standpoint. And as paradoxical as it may sound, these days, this morning, these nights, sitting in the snow, getting the bone broth ready, I felt the calmness I haven't felt in years. Just like sort of harmony with nature and knowing that there is a little bit of a survival edge and you are against the element. And I just found that a profoundly grounding experience. So I wonder if you have a viewpoint on that almost like dichotomy between the modern man being stuck behind the computer, always in their head, in their phones, in their trades, in this email anxiety, and not spending enough time looking at the wider perspective of the wilderness of the world out there.
So like I took for granted that like this part of masculine existence. 'Cause I was raised by a bear hunter. Like, you know, I'm a bow hunter to this day. I never feel like a better version of myself than I do when I am out in the woods. And I think it's like a lot of guys were like, oh, like I had a buddy of mine who I got him into hiking and hunting, but there was resistance for like a couple of years because he's like, oh, it was just, you know, my dad wasn't into it. I never learned anything. I never spent any time outdoors. Like he was just overwhelmed by the idea of where to start. And I was like, start super small. Like we just went on some day hike, and then eventually I like go to REI, you know, see what they recommend for just like a basic pack, you know. And then I took him on one overnighter, and then we went for a couple nights, and you know now he's getting hunting tags, and you know he bought a rifle, and so it's like it really is just it's a progression like anything else, you know. Like Musashi said, I know it's hard, but it's always hard at first. But more than that, like you owe it to yourself. Like guys listening to this, you really do owe it to yourself. And that like this isn't some it's not even a masculinity thing. It's just if you get out there and you get around a campfire, and it doesn't matter if you've hunted or hiked or done any of this stuff before, but you just get out in the trees or in the desert or you know what in the snow, whatever your thing is, and you preferably with some people that you like, you know, some other guys, and you just sit around a campfire. You guys hike a little bit. Maybe you have hunting tags and a rifle, but you're new to this, so it's like you're just really getting out there. Like that's all fine. You don't have to be an expert hunter. You don't have to do multi-day solos with a bow. You know, like it. Just get out there, and then by putting yourselves in these environments, you'll be surprised by how things evolve almost on their own. You know, once you do, and like you talked about, like I imagine you going on that Lapland trip, you came back like with some pretty significant evolutions to certain perspectives and feelings. Maybe you reawaken some things. You're like, oh my gosh. But it's like this isn't like people think of like some of this like these primal pursuits almost as like a preference. Like, oh, it's just another flavor on fitness or on mindsets or stuff. And it's like, no, this is where we all come from, all of us. Like this is one of the very few things that we all have in common is we all evolved from people who sat around fires, hunted and ate meat, and you know had like small community things and natural settings. It's one of those very few things that's going to make everyone feel better.
I love that you said that. And as well, talking about the primal pursuits, I know we've spoken mostly about fitness, but I think there is something very sexy about it. You know, there is a bit of a illusion that the sexiest date a husband can plan is a fancy hotel and a fancy cocktail bar. But for me, it's gazing under the star, watching the moonlight, being somewhere
Yeah.
in wilderness and actually having that proximity where it's not totally comfortable, but you have to get
Yeah.
warmer together and you can hear
Uh-huh.
the birds or hear the nature. I think that's some of the sexiest experience you can have with your husband. So maybe if you're looking for just a little bit of a different way to get closer, it can be a
Yeah.
couple tools as well as a fitness tool. At least that's my opinion.
No, I totally agree. There's a couple things too that first I'll start with a pro tip. If you're dating or seeing a woman or man and you're getting to that point where you're like, I'm pretty sure, but I'm not sure this might be the one, take them on a backpack trip. Like you'll see all of their true colors for one, but more than that, like you do something a little bit hard together, it's going to bond you. And it makes everything, the dinner, everything, the rest of the night, everything better when you guys have had to earn a little bit of it together. And it, like, again, it doesn't have to be crazy. Like, so I grew up.
Fiance at the time made me run a sand dune where he was about to propose that night, but he thought to deserve the ring, I had to kick some serious ass and first ran the dune,
I like
and
that.
then I deserved the ring.
I,
So that's the kind of vibe we have.
I like that.
Yeah, I think we would. I would love to
Awesome.
meet your wife, and I think you'll get on well with Simon. So we'll have to have a double date
Yeah.
next time.
I'm curious because we're starting to plan a lot more Europe trips, so we will definitely let you know if we're going to be in your general vicinity.
I would love that. Oh, we often come to the US as well. We have a lot of American
Okay.
clients, so would love
Yeah.
to meet your family when we come to the US. Maybe I can finally see where Twilight was shot.
More than welcome. More than welcome.
Love that, James. James, where would you like to direct our listener to get into your world? What would be the best way to connect to your knowledge, your insights, and get to know your practice better?
We're pretty much everywhere, primarily YouTube and Instagram. But if you just type in wild hunt conditioning, or it'd be easier to spell than my name, I imagine. Yeah, just type in Wild Hunt Conditioning wherever, whatever platform you're on or on the internet. And if you want to come by and get a look at what we're doing, then that's cool. And if not, then that's also cool.
Well, I've learned a lot from you. I've really enjoyed our recording together, and I seriously hope that one day soon I can go bow hunting with you. I think I have a lot to learn. So
You're more than welcome. Like I said, we all always happy to have guests.
take good care, and I hope to speak to you very soon. Thank you so much.